That's okay. Nie. Okay. Hello, everyone. Today, something a bit different. So we are happy to host Professor Arkadiusz Sołtysiak, the Vice Dean of Archeology faculty at our university. Professor Sołtysiak is actually working on bioarchaeology. So he's in his research work, he's working on studying bones and having some information taken from bones of the bodies found somewhere. But today he will tell us about the Mesopotamian roots of astrology. So the topic that he was working on some time ago during his PhD thesis. So yeah, we are really happy to host you here and looking forward for the presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me here, even if I will talk about something that is quite far away from modern astronomy. However, I hope that I'll be able to say you something about the history of developing some knowledge about the stars, about their movements, and how they were conceived by our remote ancestors. Indeed, this topic was the subject of my PhD thesis, which was completed something like more than 20 years ago, also 25 years ago. So I almost forget everything. I forget almost everything. However, for this presentation, I read the book again, so I hope that I won't make too many mistakes. Okay, so let's start. Let's start from the very beginning. What is astrology? How it was defined by the classical sources. The basic assumption of astrology is that the position of the celestial bodies, especially the sun, the moon, and the planets, at the time of birth, may determine the fate of an individual. This is the overarching aim of astrology, to understand what can happen in life of an individual based on the position of the celestial bodies at the time of birth. What does it mean? First, it means that astrology is individual. It means that the astrologers produce individual horoscopes. Individual in that term, that they deal with specific persons that were born in a specific time and specific day. And moreover, it assumes some level of the professional knowledge, because to produce a horoscope, it is necessary to know what was the position of the celestial bodies at the time of birth. And rarely the horoscopes were produced at the time of birth. Usually they were produced later. So it was necessary to go backwards in time to understand what was the position of the celestial bodies. Of course, with lower or greater confidence. So this is the astrology, how we know it from the classical sources. For example, from the works of Cicero, who wrote a book about divination, and also there was something about astrology. We also know that in the classical antiquity, the astrologers had some tools that could be used to estimate the position of the planets. And it is possible that one of those tools was found near the island of Antikythera. This is this famous Antikythera mechanism. So that is now in very bad state of preservation, but we can understand that there were some circles that perhaps could allow estimation of the position of planets in the past. So there's the question, how astrology appeared. We know that it gets some popularity during the Hellenistic period, but in the older Greek sources, astrology didn't occur very frequently. And fortunately, we know also from those ancient texts that we can still read, that the founder of the Hellenistic astrology was known as Berossos. Berossos, the priest from Babylon, who brought the hidden knowledge from Babylonia to Greece and established his school at the island of Kos. And according to most ancient sources, he was the founder of Greek astrology, of this Greek astrology focusing on determining the fate of individuals based on the position of the celestial bodies at the birth. Unfortunately, he wrote 3 books of Babyloniaca in which he presented the whole of the Babylonian knowledge, not only about astronomy, but also about history, about everything. But there was one book devoted specifically to astronomy. Unfortunately, those books are lost, as many books from that time, and only some fragments were preserved as quotation in the books of other authors. However, also from these quotations, we can understand that Berossus indeed had quite a broad astronomical knowledge. So now this is the question, how this knowledge developed, if it developed in ancient Mesopotamia. So now we can look for the roots, for the Mesopotamian roots of astrology. We know that astrology was transmitted to the Hellenistic world as a more or less complete system, and very few elements were added at the later stages. We know that this system appeared exactly in that time when Berossus was active, so at the beginning of the Hellenistic period, so something like 3rd century BC. And then the question, how this system was developed. So now I would like to invite you to the journey back to the history to look for 7 steps of developing this system in Mesopotamia. But first of all, let's look at the geographical settings. Mesopotamia is a plain between 2 rivers. For that reason, it's called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia in Greek means something between 2 rivers. Those rivers are Euphrates and Tigris. And actually, Mesopotamia consists of 2 quite distinct places. The northern Mesopotamia, with the possibility of dry farming. The rains, the precipitation is so abundant that it is possible to exercise dry farming there. And the lower part, the lower Mesopotamia, which was called first Sumer and then Babylonia, which is an alluvial plain, very arid place with the annual precipitation something like 100 millimeters per year, so far too low for dry farming. However, because this is a flat land, it was very easy to set up a very sophisticated, very large irrigation network. And this irrigation network was established already in the 5th millennium BC, so something like 7,000 years ago. And then the first urban centers based their existence on the economic surpluses of this irrigation network. So this is that part of the world where the art of scribing was invented for the first time, and we know that the earliest textual sources are dated already to the end of the 4th millennium BC, so more than 5,000 years ago. And fortunately, we have quite a lot of textual sources from all later periods, which allow us also to reconstruct the history of religion, and also the history of the conception of what the sky is and what the celestial bodies is. Okay, so the first step is to look up to the sky, to see the stars, to see the planets. And this first step was done already in this early Sumerian period, in the 3rd millennium BC. However, we know that the sky was not very important for Sumerians. They were very concerned about agriculture. They were very concerned about irrigation network. They were not very concerned about the sky. So they noted the presence of some celestial bodies. However, only 3 of them were named as the deities, which is the sun, which is obvious, the moon, which is also obvious, and one planet, Venus, which is perhaps less obvious, but we can understand that Venus is much better visible than the other planets, and for that reason, Venus was distinguished. And the original Sumerian names of those deities are Utu, the sun god, Nanna, the moon god, and Inanna, the goddess representing Venus. No other planets were named. No constellations were named as well in that time. We have only some textual evidence that the goddess Nisaba was perceived as the goddess of wisdom and the goddess that keeps the tablet of the sky. So all those stars were just signs on the tablet of Nisaba. And also the mentions of the stars are very rare. One exception is the dream of Gudea, who was one of the famous rulers of Sumerian city-states. You can look to Louvre and to see many diorite and basalt statues of Gudea, who ruled over Lagash in 22nd century. In the 22nd century BC. And Gudea was a very pious king. He decided to build the temple of the main god of the city, but was not sure what should be the plan of this temple. And finally, he had a dream. And in this dream, the plan of the temple came from the sky, came from the stars, appeared in such a way that Gudea was sure how to build the temple. So actually, this is the only clear indication that there was some connection between the sky and the earth. So that's the first step. And also from this time, from something like 2300 BC, we have also a very specific cylindric seal. Actually, Sumerians and the later people inhabiting Mesopotamia had personal seals to seal documents. Actually, the culture of Sumer was very bureaucratic, and everybody who had some position was obligated to have a seal and to seal documents. The documents were written on clay, so they were cylindric seals just roll on the surface of the clay. And one of those seals is the seal of Abda, who was an official in the Akkadian period, now in the British Museum. And we can see that this is the presentation of a celestial phenomenon, which we can identify here. This is the rise of the sun. Here we see the sun god, Utu, which is indicated by those flames arising from the earth, and also this soul is his attribute. However, here we see the goddess Inanna, so the planet of Venus. So we can identify this representation as the rise of the sun in that time when Venus is the morning star. So this is perhaps the earliest representation of something that happened on the sky in the history of Mesopotamia. So this is the first step. The second step is to name the stars, to distinguish between constellations, to understand what is going on in this chaos on the sky. And this process started towards the end of the 3rd millennium BC. In the period of the dynasty from Ur, the 3rd dynasty from Ur, so the very end, the very last century of the 3rd millennium BC. And from that time, we have a few sources indicating that some stars were already named in that time. And the first name that appears is the name of the Bull of Heaven. So this is our constellation of Taurus. So this bull of heaven was a creature that was sent from the sky to make destruction on the land by the gods. So there's also the first connection between the constellation and something that may happen on the earth. And the famous hero from the Sumerian culture, Gilgamesh, was that one who fought against the bull of heaven. There is also a mention of the star of Shulgi. Shulgi was one of the rulers of the dynasty from Ur, and he had his own star somewhere. We don't know where. There is only a mention in one of hymns that praised him. And also the first astronomical term appears in that time. This term is the Sumerian word "e," which means just a house. So if moon, for example, if the moon is on the east is the house of the moon. So there is the first very simple way to know the position of the celestial bodies. Very primitive one at this point. So here we have the first attempt to name the stars. The next step is to conceive the groups of the stars or the stars themselves in their entity as gods. And there is also very interesting text called Inanna and Shukaletuda that was written something like 1800 BC. And Shukaletuda was a shepherd who ran the flocks of sheep. And he saw Inanna sleeping in the shadow of a tree because she was very tired after wandering over the sky as the planet Venus. And he decided to rape her. And when Inanna woke up and saw that she had been raped, started to look for Shukaletuda to punish him. And finally, she got him and he was punished, but this is not important. There is one important passage in this text when Shukaletuda looks for the signs that could answer his questions. And he raised his eyes to the lower land and saw the exalted gods of the land where the sun rises. He raised his eyes to the highlands and saw the exalted gods of the land where the sun sets. So he looked at the east and observed stars that are visible on the east, and looked at the west and observed the stars at the west. So the stars were already conceived as some minor gods, without specific names, just a group of minor gods. And also, more or less from that time, we have the first example of the list of the stars, which is far from being complete. There are just 8 stars, but most of them may be safely identified, as for example the Pleiades, because they were called simply the 7, which is very easy to understand why. Sirius, Arcturus, and Scorpio, and in that case, it is possible to identify them because they have the same names as appeared in the later astronomical texts, in which we can identify the stars with much greater confidence. So this is the first list of stars, and actually we don't know why it was completed. Some some authors think that it was just a kind of mathematical example showing how to look for the same distances on the sky. Okay. And now we are moving to perhaps the most important steps. If the sky is inhabited by the gods, if the stars and all other celestial bodies are the gods, perhaps it is possible to look for some signs from them. So this is that step in which the people in Mesopotamia started to think that the sky may predict disasters. It was not present in the third millennium. Sumerians didn't care about what happens on the sky. However, at some point, people in Mesopotamia started to think that they can observe stars, not just because they are nice, but because they have some message that may announce some disasters that may happen on the earth. And the first tablet of that sort is the Venus tablet of Ammitzadduqa, who was the king of Babylon, one from the family of Hammurabi, this famous Hammurabi who is still mentioned in the handbooks of history. He ruled something like 100 years after Hammurabi. And during his reign, someone decided to observe on a regular way the heliacal risings of Venus and noted them as omina, which is important for two reasons. First, we have perhaps the earliest diary of regular observations of a celestial body. And second, it is possible to look in which time the position of Venus is consistent with this text. So the chronology of this period is also based on this tablet. Of course, there are the cycles of Venus, but now we have to distinguish just between 3 cycles and not with we don't know what. So this is very important text because later it became a part of a very famous series of astral celestial omina called Enuma Anu Enlil. But this is something that I will develop a bit in the next slide. However, what is important, in that time, just a few generations before Ammitzadduqa, there was a great disaster that happened in Mesopotamia. Euphrates changed the bed, and all, maybe not all, most previous major cities of Sumer disappeared. Sumer, 90% of Sumer turned into a desert. So it was perhaps the biggest ecological catastrophe in the history of Mesopotamia. It happened during the reign of Samsu-iluna, so just 3 generations before Ammitzadduqa. And we see very clearly that after the reign of Samsu-iluna, we note dramatic growth of interest in the sky as the source of omina. And actually, the collections of omina are very abundant in the Mesopotamian literature. There is a collection called Shum Ma'alu in Amele Shaklin, including more than 10,000, let's say, terrestrial omina. For example, what happens if a mouse comes to the house? It will be bad or not. Or what happens if you are traveling and you see a mountain on your east or on your west. So there are such terrestrial omina. There are also many menologies with the series, with the collection Ipush, and hemerologies, noting what can happen in specific months or specific days. However, there is also Enuma Anu Enlil, which was a very, very lengthy collection, something like 70 tablets, with perhaps more than 7,000 celestial omina, indicating what can happen if, for example, a moon is eclipsed, or Venus rises in the east, or Jupiter is seen near the Pleiades in the same time when the moon is rising. So these are such types of omina. And it is indicated, either it's good or bad, either the king would die or there would be a pestilence, something like that. So the earliest known tablet from this series, from Enuma Anu Enlil series, is this Amitsaduka tablet. However, already in the middle of the second half of the second millennium, this collection was already compiled. So just a few centuries, and the priests in Babylonia collected 7,000 omina just to indicate what can happen if some astronomical observations will be done. And this is the introduction to Enuma Anu Enlil. Enuma Anu Enlil in Akkadian means when Anu and Enlil. This is just the first line of the text. And we can read, when Anu, Enlil, and Ea, the great gods, built heaven and earth, they fixed the astronomical signs. Okay, so already the introduction to the series announces what is the essence of this series. We have some signs, and this is the collection of signs that indicate what can happen in the earth. So we have very strong evidence that maybe not astronomical, astral divination was very, very important in the Mesopotamian culture in that time. Okay, I think it is not necessary to read it loud, because we can move to the fifth step, which is mapping the sky. From that point, we know that the sky is very important, because we can read the future from what we see on the sky. And if the sky is important, it is necessary to produce as precise map as possible, just to understand this message from the gods. And in the second half of the second millennium BC, we see a very dramatic increase of the texts that provide more and more detailed description of the sky. The first is of course Enuma Anu Enlil, with all those celestial omina classified in some way. However, there are also so-called astrolabs. Please note the spelling. It's not the same tool as the medieval astrolabs. It's called astrolabs, but they're just tablets showing 12 ideal months and attributing 3 stars to each month. Because in that time, people in Mesopotamia decided to divide the sky into 3 sectors. The sectors of 3 principal gods in the Mesopotamian mythology. The first god is Enki in Sumerian, or Ea in Akkadian, who is the god of the underworld. The second is Anu, the god of heaven. And the third one is Enlil, which was the king of the gods, who ruled also over the earth. However, in Mesopotamian knowledge about the sky, the position of Anu and Enlil are switched. So Anu falls somewhere in between. So we have the stars of Ea, the stars that are visible only just above the southern horizon. So those constellations that are below celestial equator. The stars of Anu are around the equator, and the stars of Enlil are above. So all those stars around the North Pole belong to Enlil. So this is the first step towards the establishment of zodiac, because we have a belt of the stars around the celestial equator, not the ecliptic, but the equator. However, it is possible to move from one system to the other. So the astrolabes are such catalogs of stars that belong to the specific month and to the specific sectors of the sky. And they were expected to rise heliacally in a specific month. There is also Mul Apin, which was perhaps the first astronomical handbook produced in Mesopotamia. There are 3 tablets that summarize the whole knowledge of Mesopotamian observers of the sky about the movement of the celestial bodies. The catalog of the stars, the catalog of the planets, how the planets move, how the stars rise and set heliacally, which are in the zenith, and so on and so on. There's a lot of details in this tablet. And here is the modern reconstruction of the constellations that are indicated by Mul Apin. That was proposed just 10 years ago. And here you see that this band of Anu, 17 stars of Anu, are marked by so the orange, and the other stars, the stars of Ea and the stars of Enlil, are more gray-orange. And here are the examples of those astrolabes. Most of them are fragmented. There is also a part of the proper astrolabes. There is also a very specific tablet that is divided not into 12, but into 8 sectors. And it provides the drawings of some constellations with some notes that are partially unreadable for the modern scholars, which also indicates that already at this point, the stars were also used for magic, not only for divination, but also for magic. Okay, so now we can move to the step 6. If the stars announce the fate of the Earth, it is possible to use this knowledge to prevent some future events that may be not pleasant for example, for the king. And from the Neo-Assyrian period, we have a very large corpus of texts indicating that the knowledge about the sky had very practical political dimension. Because first, from that period, we have rituals to the gods of the night. So for the stars and constellations, and they were used also for exorcism and for astromedicine. So, for example, if you want to expel evil ghost from the patient, it is necessary to call for the specific stars that can take this demon out back to the netherworld. Because please note that according to the Mesopotamian religion, all celestial bodies may live not only in our world, but also in the netherworld, because after they set, they travel through the netherworld. So they may be used to take the demon back to the netherworld. And the only question is how to select the proper one. That one that have the power over the specific demon. And to understand this, maybe not astrologers, but the watchers of the sky of that period developed a very detailed knowledge how to recognize which god of the night is specific to a specific disease and a specific demon. And it was also a base of astromedicine. If there was some disease, it was possible to look for the constellation or the group of stars representing the god that may heal a specific disease, and the medicine was exposed to the radiation from those stars. In that time when the star is either heliacally rising or near the zenith, depending on the mode of a specific physician. Also in that time, there were very specific categories of the priests that started to be very important for the politics. They were called Baru, or later Tupshar Enuma Anueli. So those who know Enuma Anueli, those who can understand the Omina from the sky. And such priests resided mainly in Babylon and in Uruk, in two old sites, and they corresponded to the king. Especially, and we have the archive of Esarhaddon, one of the Assyrian kings, who sometimes wrote to Baruch. For example, that something happened on the sky, Jupiter raised or something like that. What does it mean? And Baru, one or a group of Baru or several Baru answered to the king that such a sign denotes such and such event in future. And then the king could adjust his policy, could adjust his deeds. There was one very bad omen when there was a moon eclipse without visibility of Jupiter. It means that the king would die. So very bad omen for the king. However, if the king can know it in advance, maybe prepared. It is possible to find a slave, to nominate him a king, to pay a homage with this slave sitting on the throne. It means that the omen will kill this slave and not the real king, who was called in that time just a farmer, but still had a real power. Okay, just sat down in the background and gave decisions, but was never called a king. He was called just a farmer. And if nothing happened in the period of 100 days, which was a standard term for influencing Earth by the sky, his slave was simply killed. And it means that those omina had 100% of accuracy, because every time when there was the eclipse of the moon without the visibility of Jupiter, the king died. Okay, so it perfectly made sense. Yeah. So we have very abundant correspondence between the king and those priests had real impact on the policy on the policy of the whole country. And here you can see Esarhaddon, this king who left most of this correspondence, and his son Ashurbanipal was so interested in the sky that he learned how to write Enuma Anu Enlil. He was one of a few literate rulers of Mesopotamia. He had a golden copy of Enuma Anu Enlil, and could check out if those Baru priests really produce good advice. So it went to such extent, which of course didn't prevent the Assyrian Empire from the fall just 20 years after the death of Ashurbanipal. Okay, so now we can move to the step 7, the final step, the step towards astrology, because now we have everything that we need to develop astrology. We have the priests that developed specific knowledge, that learned how to predict some phenomena on the sky, like eclipses, for example, or conjunctions of specific planets. And exactly in that time, in the Neo-Assyrian time, those priests developed something that is called the Diviner's Manual, 14 tablets of esoteric knowledge about the mechanics of the sky. There was also another source, Inangi, in which this secret knowledge was presented in such obscure way that some parts of this treatise are still not readable or for the modern scholars. They used a lot of techniques that perhaps had influence on later gematria and Jewish Kabbalah. However, what we know about this time, that first, they produced ephemerides. They could predict the position of the planets with relatively high precision. They also developed the rules of intercalation because there was a problem. The calendar in ancient Mesopotamia was based on the observation of the moon, and was not very fitting the solar year. And for that reason, they produced intercalation. However, first it was on quite accidental manner. Simply when a ruler observed that the calendar starts to shift, decided to add additional month. However, in that time, they produced the intercalation system that was later adopted by the Greeks, based on the period of 19 years, which was quite accurate. They could also predict the eclipses, and they produced the first almanacs. In that time, there were indeed the priests that did nothing else, just looking at the sky and noting the position of the planets in a specific hours of a specific night. So we have quite abundant almanacs from that time. And moreover, at some point, the cult of the Mesopotamian deities started to be completely neglected. It is the period when Mesopotamia first started to be a part of the Persian Empire. Then it was conquered by Alexander the Great. It was the beginning of the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic gods became much popular than the original Mesopotamian gods. So those priests were no longer involved in any kind of cultic activity. They were involved only in the observation of the sky. They were completely devoted only to the observation of the sky, to such extent that they reinterpreted all previous mythological texts as the presentation of some celestial phenomena, like occultations, like heliacal rising, and so on. And those priests were quite few in number. However, they kept this hidden knowledge in a few families living in Babylonia, specifically in Babylon and in Uruk, in those two towns in which the temples of the old gods survived. And of course, they were given some money by the kings, by the Seleucid kings and by the Persian kings. However, they found a new source of income for themselves, because with such a knowledge, it was not necessary for them to keep an eye on the king only. They were able to develop individual horoscopes on request on other people. So, and simply they established a new business, keeping this knowledge as a secret of those families. And actually, we have some cuneiform tablets showing how these secrets could be kept. There was a council of those families, and they invited the new members only from the sons of the old priest, and only under condition that they swear an oath that they will never tell anything about the secrets to someone that is not a part of this community. So from this diviner's manual, so a kind of internal handbook that they developed for themselves, we can learn that sky and earth both produce portents. So sky and earth are interconnected. So appearing separately, they are not separate because sky and earth are related. So everything that we see on the sky will happen on the earth. So it was a very simple rule that explains everything. And since 652, we have systematic astronomical diaries indicating the position of all planets. And this is also that time in which the band of Anu, this middle band of the constellations, developed into the zodiac, the 12 signs of zodiac attributed to the specific months and used to predict the fate of individuals. And also from that time, we have a few true representations of the constellations that are shown in the upper part of this picture. And those representations and the names of the constellations were also adopted by the Hellenistic astronomy as well. And the modern names of the constellations, in most cases, are derived from the Mesopotamian ones. Also in Dendera, in this famous representation in the Temple of Hathor, with a dome showing the constellations, we have almost exact copies of what we see in Mesopotamia. So also in Dendera, we have the representation of the Mesopotamian vision of the sky and Mesopotamian vision of the constellations. And finally, the first horoscopes are known from this late Hellenistic period, which means 3rd century BC, the time of immediately after death of Alexander the Great. And here is one of those horoscopes. You can look how they were formed. Year 63 of the Seleucid era, so it's something like 240 something BC. The month Tebetu, evening of the 2nd day, Anu Belshunu was born. So here we have the information, what was the hour and the day of birth of a specific person. On that day, the sun was in 9 degrees 30 seconds Capricorn, the moon in 12 degrees Aquarius. His days will be long. So the days of this Anu Belshunu will be long. Jupiter at the beginning of Scorpio, someone will have the prince. We don't know who is the prince, but he will get help, obviously. A child was born from Venus in Aquarius, he will have sons. So we can learn everything about the life of this Anu Belshunu. Mercury in Capricorn, Saturn in Capricorn, Mars in Cancer. So the diviner, the astrologer, actually, I think we can call them already astrologers. didn't use the position of Mercury, Saturn, and Mars, but noted in which constellations those planets were located. So we see that during this journey that lasted for 1,500 years, we have a transition from people that were actually not very interested in the sky. They noted that there are stars, but nothing more, to that place when the very developed astrological system was formed and was used by those scholarly priests just to earn money. They had nothing else to do. There was no longer worship of the old gods. There were no kings. To him, they could send the letters warning them that something wrong may happen. But they found a new target, regular people. And such kind of astrology became popular in the Hellenistic world, then spread to Greece, spread to Rome, and it keeps to be used until the modern time. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much for listening, and perhaps you have some questions.
Thank you very much. Good business. And any questions or comments?
I have a question about these priests. So they sent an interpretation to the king.
Yes.
And since it was a secret knowledge, they could, like you said, they could lie. Is there any
yes,
that they use this, that they lie to the king?
Yes, sure, but Assyrian kings were not stupid. So when they had any question, they sent this question to several priests from several places. However, all those priests used the same resource, Enuma Anu Enlil tablets. So when they did it correctly, the answer should be the same. And Ashurbanipal went even farther in this direction of suspicion, and he learned how to read Enuma Anu Enlil to be able to check out on himself what would happen.
And I have another question also about the horoscopes. So the ones that you showed us were very general, like someone
Yes.
else has sons. Were they all very general so that
Yes,
they would generally...
Actually, it was quite a typical structure, and it was a kind of a routine text for those priests, and they simply used the general knowledge to say that someone will be happy,
So like nowadays.
Yeah, in exactly the same way. They were personalized, that there was the name of the addressee, but they were not very detailed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so do you know if they used any instruments? If they developed any instruments for measuring positions in the sky or the earth, or they just think that?
Actually, there are some mentions of some instruments. However, these are Akkadian names, and it's sometimes it's very difficult to understand what is the instrument itself. For sure, they had a kind of a water clock in this late period. They could use a gnomon to look for the position of the sun, and perhaps they use some simple sticks to estimate the distance of a celestial body from the horizon. But I think those tools were not very sophisticated.
And I have another semantic question. Since this list dealt mainly with observing stars, why do we call them priests and not scientists?
Because they are called priests by the original sources. They were a specific category of the priests.
This is what we translate as words to our...
Yes. They were called priests because primarily their duty was to worship gods. Worship gods by understanding the message from the gods. So they were priests.
More questions, comments? Right?
Was there any astrology and horoscopes in Americas?
You mean in the pre-Columbian cultures?
Right.
I don't know. I never heard about this. They were also, some of them were concerned with the sky and produced some quite sophisticated calendars, as in the Maya culture. And for sure, the fate of the kingdom and the fate of the king could be linked to some celestial phenomena in the same way as in the New Assyrian Empire. But I'm not sure if they went this one step forward to produce individual horoscopes. I don't think so. Because if you have a king, if a king may donate those priests with quite large amount of money, it is not necessary to look for another business.
So in your research, you were studying mostly texts, right? Not the archaeological things. It was those texts that were already translated. Like when you said about tablets, it was already a text that was mentioning the tablet, right?
Our knowledge about sky watching in Mesopotamia is mainly based on the text. Sometimes it is possible to look for orientations of some buildings if they were oriented to some specific directions. However, the texts are the most important source of information.
I don't see any questions on Zoom. I don't see more questions here. So let's thank you, Arkadiusz.
Thank you very much.
And next week we have our alumni, Zosia Kaczmarek from Heidelberg. She is a PhD student in Heidelberg. She will be talking about some microlanguage stuff. So see you here. Thank you.